I never in my wildest dreams thought that this website would garner that much attention, and I'm really glad it has, because I think it's helped a lot of people find direction in the UFO field. Because if you just plunge into this like I did, you have no idea which way to go. Mm-hmm. Because there really isn't a lot of information out there on who's credible and who's not. And these are my opinions on my website, by the way. Mm-hmm. And it's a very confusing field to get into, where a lot of people are selling fluff UFO videos or other garbage and giving people bad information. And hopefully my website is a resource for folks to come to and say, oh, okay, and get some direction.
Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America Audio, with your host, Tim Binnall.
Hello there, my friends. This is Tim Binnall of BinnallofAmerica.com with another edition of Binnall of America Audio. It is June 10th, 2006. My guest this week is Royce Myers. He is the editor and creator of UFOWatchdog.com. It's always been a favorite website of mine. I check it out as often as I can to make sure I know what's going on in the world of ufology, because Royce Myers is on top of it. They specialize in investigating the claims of some of the more outrageous personalities in the field of the esoteric, and often find that there's more than meets the eye to these stories, and there's a lot of smoke and mirrors that go on, and that the people making some crazy claims are often just plain crazy themselves. Let me give you a little bit of background on Royce Myers. Royce Myers is the editor and creator of UFOWatchdog.com. He has an occupational and educational background in law enforcement and criminalistics, and holds an AAS degree in criminal justice. Royce has conducted field investigations into cattle mutilations and crop phenomenon, working in conjunction with the BLT research team. UFO Watchdog comes to you from the home of Royce and is operated by him with the occasional assistance of friends, fellow researchers, and investigators, and other contributors. And no matter what anyone says, the government is not funding Royce as a debunker, as is the fantasy of those who overestimate their importance. His website is UFOWatchdog.com. It is one of the more controversial websites out there in ufology. I'm a longtime fan of UFOWatchdog.com. As Binnall of America Audio got rolling along, I said, let's get Royce Myers on the show. Let's talk about UFOWatchdog.com, because you don't hear from Royce Myers on many other radio shows. That's why we wanted to be different here at Binnall of America Audio and bring you the UFO watchdog himself, Royce Myers. So without any further ado, let's rock and roll. This interview was conducted on May 23rd, 2006. Royce Myers on Binnall of America Audio.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Binnall of America Audio. I want to welcome as my special guest this week, Royce Myers. He is the brainchild behind UFOWatchdog.com. Their tagline is, sometimes you need a second opinion, and they focus on really keeping an eye on ufology, the field, and rooting out some of the troublemakers that emerge in ufology and setting the record straight on some of these stories that come out, and you're sort of wondering, what's the story with that? And then it turns out the guy's a liar. Chances are you heard about it at UFOWatchdog.com, because that's what Royce Myers does. They're watching over the UFO field, thankfully, because somebody has to do it, let's face it. Chances are you've sort of seen a little bit of an influence from their website on BinnallofAmerica.com, because I definitely, as I was building up the website, I was always checking out UFOWatchdog.com because I appreciate all their work that they do. So welcome to the show, Royce Myers. Thanks for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Let's start out with your background, how you got into ufology, and what led up to you starting UFOWatchdog.com.
Well, I first got interested in UFOs in 1994. I was out driving with a friend of mine very late at night. It was a weekday, and this is down in Southern Oregon. And I'd had a sighting of a very unusual object. And after that, I had started reading just about every UFO book I could get my hands on and trying to find whatever information I could. And I've done some cabin mutilation investigations and some work for the BLT research folks. And after that, I had decided, well, I need to go to a UFO conference because that's what everybody does. They get interested, they read books, they exhaust all the resources for books almost, and decide that, well, I need to go to a conference because the people who know about this stuff are going to be there.
Yeah.
And so I went to a conference down in Los Angeles, and I want to say about 95. And I kind of had an epiphany of sorts when I was there. What I saw, I really didn't like. And I told this. I was down in McMinnville, Oregon, for the UFO Fest over this last weekend, and I told people that I hate UFO conferences. I got these, a couple of chuckles and a couple of weird looks from it. And one of the main reasons that I came just to really not like the whole UFO conference bit was that there's a lot of sensationalism. And they were very conspiracy-based, and I stay away from conspiracies because everybody associates conspiracies with nuts.
Yeah.
And the UFO conference seemed more interested in promoting UFO personalities who were making these god-awful sensationalistic claims as opposed to promoting people who I felt were a lot more credible.
Mm-hmm.
And there was also this apathy in terms of when somebody's credibility was really questioned, or there was reason to believe that it was a hoax, they would host these folks anyway. And so when I started saying this, I was pretty concerned about it because I have a pretty solid interest in UFOs.
Yeah.
And so I started a small website. It was called Expose, the Watchdog of Ufology, and it was a small personal website that I had. And after a while, what I was doing was I was publishing my opinions on cases and some of the things that I had found and experienced in the field. And it was starting to kind of get popular, which I was really surprised. A lot of people were tuning in and listening to what I had to say. And so later, sometime in 99, I had scaled it up to UFOWatchdog.com, changed the name and the look of the site.
Yeah.
And kind of became, in some sense, a better business bureau for UFOs.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't sell newsletters or predictions or website subscriptions, lectures, DVDs, books. I don't sell any of that stuff. It's one of the few sites that has a lot of, I think, decent content on it that doesn't charge for the content.
Mm-hmm.
And my goal was to further serious debate and to expose the frauds and the charlatans and the snake oil salesmen and all the other drivel in the field as much as I could to hopefully take it to the next level to where we could get rid of some of these morons and move along and start really focusing on the credible body of UFO evidence.
Yeah. And like you said, the general apathy of people in the esoteric fields when someone exposes a hoax. There's also a lot of zealous folks who will just they will swear by somebody no matter what. What's been the reaction of ufology to your website and your work? What's been the reaction of just not only the folks in like the names and the personalities, but also the everyday people? Have you gotten a lot of reaction from people?
I've gotten good reactions from the majority of folks. I get, once in a while you get this kind of crazy slanted email or rambling or whatever else. But for the most part, it was very well received by a lot of people, and I found that there were a lot of people out there that were as sick and tired as I was of all the nonsense that was going on.
Yeah.
And so I've got a pretty good readership. This website it's amazing. It's almost got like 4 million hits.
Oh wow.
It's nuts. I never in my wildest dreams thought that this website would garner that much attention, and I'm really glad it has because I think it's helped a lot of people find direction in the UFO field. Because if you just plunge into this like I did, you have no idea which way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Because there really isn't a lot of information out there on who's who's credible and who's not. And these are my opinions on my website, by the way. Mm-hmm. And it's a very confusing field to get into, where a lot of people are selling fluff UFO videos or other garbage and giving people bad information. And hopefully my website is a resource for folks to come to and say, oh, okay, and get some direction.
Yeah. And what's interesting about you is that you sort of, like you said, you started out on the internet. That's sort of where you've grown as a researcher. When did you say you started that first expose website?
Oh, probably in 97.
Oh, wow. So you've seen so it's been like what now? Almost 10 years, right?
The website, yeah, just about. I've actually been interested in UFOs since 94, since that first initial sighting. So I've been around it for about 12 years.
And how would you describe the evolution of ufology as a science on the internet? As the internet's grown and everything, how do you think ufology's adapted to using the internet?
I think it's just like anything else. There's a lot of bad information out there. There's a lot of good information, and it really doesn't take much. Anybody can get a computer, a keyboard, and plug in and get a website. It's just, I think it's helped in a lot of aspects, because it's a lot easier to do investigations and to stay in contact with people.
Yeah.
And it's a great tool because you can go in, like now it's amazing. Before, where people would never hear about a UFO case that happened in another country, here in the United States, in another country like, say, England or somewhere in Latin America or somewhere over in Europe, now they're able to go in and do a search, on a number of search engines and pull up all kinds of news articles. So in that sense, it's a very useful tool for staying in contact with folks and getting more information. And on the other hand, though, it's also been not so good in terms of, there are a lot of people who can put websites up now and make all sorts of outrageous claims and do their UFO commerce online and get their information out there a lot easier too.
Yeah. And now, moving on to what UFO Watchdog's all about. Like you said, you're sort of like the Better Business Bureau of ufology. What do you think motivates these people that come out of the woodwork with their bogus stories and their elaborate claims?
I think it's a couple of things. And in kind of looking at this whole field, I think what's really happened is that a lot of people have taken the acronym UFO and have kind of made it their own acronym as they've gone along. I mean, in the purest sense, it's an unidentified flying object. It's something in flight. We don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of other people, though, and this kind of covers both the skeptics and the believers in a lot of ways. It also covers those people whose motives are very questionable as far as I'm concerned. But some people think that UFO means undeniably from outer space, or some folks think it means unfounded foolish observations, where anything you see can be explained.
Yeah.
And then there's the group that I kind of focus on, and I think some of them think that UFO stands for ulterior financial opportunity, or it's kind of a fantasy outlet for them.
Yeah.
Where they tend to tell people what most folks want to hear, and they capitalize on people believing it. And that's where a lot of that comes from. A lot of those folks like to get out there, they like to sell, they like to wine and dine you, and then they hit you with the bill.
Yeah. A lot of the people I talk to in ufology who are on the show and everything, it seems like a mantra a lot of times comes up that there's no money to be made in ufology. How do you work that paradoxical thing in with these hoaxers that are trying to make money? Is there money to be made in ufology, but it's all going to these phony baloney guys, or are they just sucking all the money that the small pool that's there? Are they the ones that are getting the money from the people that are willing to spend, or how do you I'm at a loss for a word here. How do you fit that paradox in with what you've observed in the UFO field?
If there's no money to be made in UFOs, then why are there UFO conventions? Why are people selling UFO books and publishing them? Why are people hawking DVDs and newsletters? And why are people appearing at conferences? There is money to be made depending on where you're at. If you're one of the researchers who does this full time, who is committed to finding answers, and who tends to live by a code of ethics, so to speak, who wants to go out there, who wants to do a good job, who wants to report the facts to the public, those folks who do that full time, I think it's very difficult for them to make a living. I'll tell you what, they're not getting rich. I'll guarantee you that.
Yeah.
On the other side of the coin, there are the folks that want to make the sensationalistic claims. They want to tell you all sorts of nonsense, and it goes back to telling people what they want to hear, kind of thing.
Yeah.
As their hook to reel you in. If these people aren't making money, then why are they still around? There is money to be made in UFOs, and it depends on what side of the fence you're on. If you're on the side where you're willing to tell people anything and everything so you can sell them a newsletter or a book or a DVD or a tape or a ticket to your lecture, those are the folks that are the problem in this field.
Yeah.
And in terms of money, here's a great example of this. A character named, who was calling himself Dr. Johnathan Reed, and we'll have time to discuss that later, who came into this field out of nowhere with all sorts of sensational claims, none of which he could prove and still can't, was the keynote speaker at a UFO conference in Nevada. And during that time, he sold out the place, 700 people, at $20 a pop.
Oh, wow.
How much money is that? It's $14,000. So in terms of, is there money to be made in UFOs? Yeah, there is, and it depends on how you're trying to make it.
Yeah. Why don't we talk a little bit about that Dr. Reed hoax, because that seems to be one of the biggest claims to fame for the UFOWatchdog.com website. You were the guys that really got on this story, tackled it, and really dissected it and broke the story that it was indeed a hoax. Why don't you, hopefully by now, most people have forgotten about it. But let's, let's refresh their memory about who Dr. Reed was and what the story was, and the whole saga of the Dr. Reed story.
I got involved in this. I was out driving around late at night. I was heading home, and I heard, I was listening to a late-night radio program where this guy was on several times, and this guy comes on and says that he'd killed an alien in the woods in Washington State, and I believe it was November of 98 is when he was on, and he claimed that the incident happened in October of 96.
Okay.
And he was accompanied by a fellow calling himself Robert Rafe, and he told of this encounter where he killed this alien in the woods of Washington State while he was out hiking with his dog. While he's out hiking with his dog starts going nuts, and this alien comes out and kills the dog. Well, Dr. Reed, not being too fond of this alien, having just killed his best friend, picks up a tree branch and clobbers the alien in the head. And then he sees this small UFO. Well, he's killed the alien, so he says. So he gets out a survival blanket, one of those silver blankets that conserves heat, and wraps this alien up, throws it in his Jeep, and drives it home and throws it in a freezer. And suddenly, the next thing you know, the alien comes back to life, the government's after him, and they've killed his friend, and they've ransacked his house, and they've taken all his evidence, and now Dr. Reed's on the run for his life.
Oh, man.
So that was the story, and this story garnered so much attention, it created such a fury among UFO folks. I was just amazed that this story made it as far as it did.
Yeah.
And I was just like, what? So I decided, well, I'm going to check into this because this doesn't sound quite right. Because during the interview, this gentleman named Robert, who was calling himself Robert Rafe, had kind of guided this Dr. Reed character through the program. Like it was scripted and they had practiced.
Yeah.
And so I started checking into it, and I talked to a lady named Laura Fine, who was representing herself as the manager for this Reed and Rafe character.
Okay.
For these two guys.
Yeah.
And I told her, I said, look, I have access to scientists and whatever else. If you would like to prove your story, I would be more than happy to help you out with that. And, of course, I got the answer I was expecting. Well, we're not interested in proving anything. And she got on the subject of doing a book and producing a video and doing lectures. And she said that they wanted to make a movie out of it. And so what I did was I baited her a little bit, and I said, "Hey, listen," and this is true, by the way. I know someone who's in the film business down in Los Angeles, and I brought up that person's name, and I said, "Hey, I know such and such who made this movie. You know, would you be interested in having him contact you?" And she just the conversation peaked from there. She was very happy to talk to me, and she wanted to keep talking about this movie deal. And so after that, I went, okay, I know exactly what this is. This is a couple of folks who are likely doing this to gain financially. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll check it out and see what's what. And so I started investigating this whole thing. And I found a number of things that were very, very wrong about Dr. Reed. And in doing this, I'll get to the short of it because we don't have, I mean, we could talk about this for a good 2 hours easily. Yeah. Just this case alone. Well, when I started investigating the case, I found a number of problems with Dr. Reed and his evidence. He'd claimed that he had worked at a number of prestigious universities and had degrees from here and there. And, of course, you know, you couldn't find any of this because the bad guys had come and wiped all of his records clean, according to him. Yeah. And during this investigation, I also found out that his film wasn't quite what he was touting it to be. He'd had some stills. And what I did was he had published some of these still negatives to the internet saying, see, these are the original negatives. And people were endorsing them as the real thing. And it was on Kodak film, so I called Kodak. And I had a talk with one of their film reps and told him, hey, this is the time that the guy is claiming that he took these photos. Can you tell me when this film was manufactured? Yeah. And the guy said that in the time frame that Dr. Reed, quote unquote, claimed that he took these photos, he couldn't have because the film wasn't even manufactured. Huh. So that sealed it for me right there. Yeah. I said, well, okay, we're done. The cat's out of the bag. Here we go. And so I started publishing articles about my findings on the internet, and I started catching some flack from some people. Suddenly, you know, and this is a big thing in the UFO field. Suddenly, when you start telling people what they don't want to hear, you're a government agent. Yeah. You work for the government, you're a government bad guy, or you're working for somebody else, and they're paying you to feed them disinformation, and it gets pretty ridiculous, no matter what evidence you have. Mm-hmm. And so from there, I continued my investigation and found out a number of other things. And a lesser-known piece in this story was that Dr. Reed had claimed that the government had yanked one of his teeth out and had replaced it with a fake tooth with a transmitter in it. And somebody supplied me with photos. Someone had contacted one of the investigators or the so-called investigators that was involved in this whole Dr. Reed thing. And this investigator had supplied this person with these photos and this background story about this tooth. Well, this person forwarded it to me. He was nice enough to share it with me. And looking at it, it's a picture of a tooth that's been broken in half, and there's a small electronic-looking device in the middle of it. Well, I posted that on the website because, one, it doesn't even look like a real tooth that came out of any human being. Yeah. And the other thing was that I was interested in what that device was because it looked very familiar to me. Well, somebody had written me back saying that it's a transistor. You can buy a Radio Shack for $1 and somebody just snipped the ends off of it. Yeah. So that was another piece. So I continued to press on to try and find out who this guy was. I had made a couple of trips up to Seattle, and one day I'm checking my email, and this guy writes saying, hey, I know who this clown is. And I said, okay, well, who is he? And he said, call me and I'll tell you. So I called this gentleman and I talked to him, and he had a pretty interesting story that he had known this Johnathan Reed character, except his name wasn't Johnathan Reed. It was John Bradley Rudder. And he said that he had known this gentleman all of his life. And that this gentleman, during the time that not all of his life, I'm sorry, for something like 12 years. He'd known him for a very long time. And said that this gentleman, who was posing as Dr. Reed, said that he was Dr. Johnathan Rudder and that he was a psychologist working graveyard doing evaluations for patients and making up treatment plans. And that was just, I don't know any psychiatrists that work at night.
Yeah.
Unless they're on call and going to a mental ward or whatever else.
Yeah.
So this gentleman, and his name's Bill Werner, told me, hey, I've known this guy for a long time. And I said, okay, well, can you prove it? And he said, absolutely.
Nice, yeah.
And this is what Mr. Werner told me. He said that Rudder's ex-fiance's sister is about 25 minutes from you right now, visiting some friends. I can call her and see if she wants to meet with you.
Nice.
And I said, okay, sure. So he put me in touch with this lady's sister, and I drove about a half hour from my home and met with this lady at a coffee shop. And I didn't know these people. I didn't know what was really going on. I thought, okay, you get a little paranoid when you're dealing with people that you don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so I was a little careful when I went up, because these UFO people who pull this kind of stuff can be a little fanatical at times. Mm-hmm. And so I met with this lady, and we had coffee. She was very nice. And I said, okay, so can you prove that you know this guy? And she told me, the story that she told me was that Rudder had been her sister's fiancé for 15 years.
Oh, wow.
And had fooled them all for that period of time that he was a psychologist.
Whew.
That's quite a scam to be pulling off.
Yeah.
And so came the big question. I came back to her. I said, okay, can you prove it? And she said, sure. Well, she happened to have some family pictures with her that she'd brought down to show some friends of hers. Mm-hmm. And there were a ton of pictures of the esteemed Dr. Reed during the time that he was supposedly on the run. And they showed one photo showed him at a wedding party. Another photo showed him at a wedding dinner. And during the time frame that he claimed that he was on the run, he was hiding in Canada. He couldn't come above ground because the bad guys were out to get him. And it showed another one of them at a Thanksgiving dinner where he was clowning around with one of the children of the family. And it was just, I was like, okay, well, I guess this kind of seals it.
Yeah.
And so in the middle of all this, before I wrote before I published my investigation, Dr. Reed had a number of supporters. We'll call him Dr. Reed because that's who they know him as.
Yeah, yeah.
He had a number of supporters, which I was very surprised at seeing some of these people supporting the story. One guy was Daniel Iaria, and I've never met this gentleman, and I tried to have some communication with him, and he wound up blocking my email because, again, people who you tell things that they don't want to hear will ignore you or call you a government agent.
Yeah. And
Daniel Iaria was a big supporter of the story. Huge. He invested a lot of his money in the story. Mm-hmm. And there were a number of other investigators that supported this tale. And one of them was a gentleman named Jaime Maussan, who a lot of people are probably familiar with.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, to this day, even after I have published my investigation exposing who this gentleman really was, and all of my evidence, there are people who still support the story, and Mr. Maussan apparently is one of them. And after I did this expose, and one of the more comical parts of all this was Robert Wraith. I found out who he really was too, and there was another gentleman involved in this that they refer to as Dr. Harold Chacon. Mm-hmm. And they claim that Robert Wraith and this Dr. Harold Chacon character had never met. They met right after this, a few months after the story was on the radio.
Yeah.
And they'd had Dr. Chacon, who was supposed to be a microbiologist, examine this DNA, this alien DNA that Rudder supposedly had, and they found that it was unlike anything else, and da-da-da-da-da. Well, I found out that Robert Wraith and this Harold Chacon character both worked at a gas station in Seattle, and there was some small little chat club group up in Seattle that had actually found this out. And they said that they found out that one of them worked there, and then they found out the other, or something like that. But anyway, that's where the information came from.
Yeah.
And so I decided that once I had all this information, I'd be going up to Seattle to do my own little investigation. And when I got up there, I went to this gas station where these guys supposedly work, and one of them, the Robert Wraith, his real name's Robert Area, didn't work there anymore. He'd quit, and I think had moved down to California, or so the story goes.
Yeah.
Well, the Cheryl Chacon character is still working there.
Oh, man.
So I walked in, and I got gas, and I got some coffee and stuff while I was there. Walked up and talked to him briefly, and he didn't want to say anything about the whole thing. He didn't want to talk about it at all.
He must have been surprised to see you.
And the guy's in his workplace, so I respected it. Yeah, he was very surprised. And so I left, and I figured, okay, well, I'm not going to bother this guy while he's at work.
Yeah.
And that was that. So I confirmed that this Harold Chacon guy worked there. The funny thing is that while I was up there on one of my trips, I stayed with a lady named Kathleen Anderson while I was up there. And Kathleen worked for, she was a MUFON member for a long time. She was a pretty good UFO investigator, really nice lady, very sharp. And the funny thing was that at this gas station, Kathleen's brother worked there.
Oh, man.
And so there was all these little ties, to all these other folks. And Kathleen lived really close to that gas station, about a half a mile. And she told me that, and I talked to her brother, and her brother said, oh, yeah, those guys are talking about that thing all the time in the gas station. And so, anyway, I wound up publishing my investigation, and I thought that had really put a dampener on the story and had finally exposed it for what it was. And the sad thing about this is during this time, in between when he came out and when I published my investigation, people had bought books and videos and paid for lectures and who knows what else from these gentlemen, and were really victimized, in my opinion, by this group of people. Yeah. And the odd thing is that I talked to one of the investigators involved in this, a gentleman named Dan McAvoy, who had told me that during a trip down to, I think it was Disneyland, that he and Rudder were out walking around, and Rudder knew quite a bit about the special effects business. He knew how they did all the special effects at these theme parks. Yeah. And during this, he told me that, this McAvoy gentleman told me that while they were down there staying at a hotel, he saw one of the credit cards that this Johnathan Reed character was using, and saw the name John Rudder on it. Yeah. Saw the real name, but for whatever reason didn't say anything. And there were a number of other things that happened in this little circle of investigators. One of the claims was that they had examined this artifact that Reed had supposedly got from the alien, which was this thing they called the link. You wore it on your wrist, and it supposedly transported you to another dimension or whatever else. Mm-hmm. And they said that they had it examined in a lab and found that it utilized nanotechnology. And one of the other gentlemen that was involved in this, who I had a conversation with, told me that their analysis of this so-called link artifact consisted of a guy who has some kind of science background looking at it through a case and proclaiming that it had nanotechnology.
Oh, man.
And one of the more strange aspects of this that I've heard from a couple of people that were in this little circle was Reed had gone down to Latin America, courtesy of Jaime Maussan, and they had launched this media blitz where he was on a show called, I believe it is Alto Rojo. And I forget my terrible Spanish, but I think it means one more time or something like that. But the show is the Tonight Show of Latin America.
Oh, wow.
They've got like 30 million people that watch this show. It's enormously popular down there. It's huge.
Yeah.
And they were on the show for a couple of hours.
Oh, wow.
And got a lot of press attention down there. Well, during the stay down there, Jaime Maussan had, this is what I was told, had hired security people to follow Rudder around because he was afraid that the guy posing as Dr. Reed, he was afraid that somebody was going to come and kill him. The government, the so-called bad guys.
Yeah, yeah.
And during this, they were having lunch, and Rudder got up to go use the bathroom, a.k.a. Dr. Johnathan Reed.
Yeah.
I'm sure this gets confusing for people with all these names. So we'll call him Dr. Reed from here on out. I said that before, and I didn't. So anyway, Dr. Reed gets up to go use the bathroom, and one of the security guys kind of follows him and can see him a little bit in the bathroom. Says that Dr. Reed made a fist and hit himself in the face. Then ran out to the table they were sitting at saying, hey, I just got attacked.
Oh, man.
Well, we never heard about this from any of the investigators because, for me, that would certainly set off a red flag.
Yeah.
Definitely. So there was a lot of stuff that a lot of people didn't wind up hearing about with regard to this whole charade.
Yeah.
So...
And what's happened to Dr. Reed since then? Has he, since he's been exposed as a hoaxer, has he sort of fallen off the map now? Because I haven't heard anything about it in a long time.
Incredibly, he has not. There have been a couple of people down in Florida who have hosted him as a speaker for small private lectures.
Mm-hmm.
So he's still out there floating around, and he republished a book. He has a new video out. I don't think that he's garnering the attention he used to.
Yeah.
And I hope that's because of the investigation that's on my website. I really do, because I'll tell you, this guy, he got a lot of money from a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly.
And after I exposed this, he had issued some very strange statement saying, well, what I said really happened, but it happened at another time in another life, and they weren't interested in providing any proof, and that was kind of the end of it. So he's still out there floating around. He was actually at a UFO conference in Nevada, walking around with someone last year, and they took a photo of him. And I'm surprised they would even let that guy in the door.
Yeah.
If I ran that conference, I'll tell you what, he would be the last person who would be allowed in there after pulling that charade.
Yeah, exactly. And now moving on to another more infamous hoax that you've investigated pretty heavily on your website and that has become pretty big news this spring is the alien autopsy film hoax that was probably even more famous than the Dr. Reed story, because the alien autopsy story made it to mainstream America. It's almost now it's almost like a joke in mainstream America now, alien autopsy movie. So tell me a little bit about your investigation of the alien autopsy film and what you think of what's going on now with regards to Ray Santilli and this UK film. I'm not entirely familiar with it, so you know more about it than I do.
I've actually seen the special you're talking about.
Okay.
And I really haven't investigated it per se. There's a gentleman named Mark Sinner who runs a website called Beyond Roswell. It's one of the best sources of information for alien autopsy film information. Mm-hmm. And he has really done a lot of investigating on this film from start to finish. It's got a great website with a lot of good information on it. So I haven't investigated this per se. When I first got into UFOs, for whatever reason, in my mailbox, I got pictures of this still movie that came out, and I'm not really sure why I got the pictures. Someone just sent them to me, and it was before this whole brouhaha started. Before anybody had even seen the film, I had these pictures, and I really wasn't sure why they got sent to me. And the story was told about them. Somebody had written me this real brief letter about it, and I really didn't know much about it at the time. And then the whole brouhaha started with it.
Yeah.
Where a gentleman named Ray Santilli had claimed that he was here in the United States buying film stock footage of Elvis Presley because he was doing documentaries and selling them. And during this, he says that he found one gentleman who had footage of Elvis who also showed him what he claimed was the autopsy of an alien that was recovered from a UFO crash in Roswell.
Yeah.
And the gentleman who was trying to sell him the film claimed that, I was a cameraman for the Army. No one knows I've got this film. I'm getting old. I could use some money.
Yeah.
And so Ray Santilli left and came back 2 years later and supposedly bought the film from this gentleman. And from there on out, it started. It was such a sensational piece of footage that a lot of people really thought that it was the real deal. The serious folks in the UFO field didn't buy it for 5 seconds.
Yeah.
A lot of people were decrying this film as an outright fraud, but no one could prove it. That was what the really interesting thing is, because generally the folks that perpetrate these frauds and these hoaxes aren't too bright when it comes to covering their own tracks.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people started investigating this film. A lot of UFO personalities, and I call them UFO personalities because these are the people you either hear on late night radio quite a bit, or you see at conventions, or you hear their name all the time, or they publish a number of books or whatever else.
Yeah.
A lot of UFO personalities endorse this film as real. saying that, well, I have, friends of mine who are, or I have intelligence contacts within the government that say that this film's real or whatever else. And it went on and on and on. And it was the subject of a special that was broadcast on the Fox channel.
Yep.
Called Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction. And it was a ratings bonanza for the folks at Fox. And they made a ton of money on it. Well, in the same vein, Mr. Santilli made an awful lot of money off this thing, selling the rights to several TV companies throughout the world.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I always stuck to when this film came out was that Santilli never gave up a piece of that footage for an actual analysis to determine if it was real or not, in terms of when was it filmed, is the footage real, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
He never did that, and that was one sticking point with me. When that happened, I said, forget it. I'm not going to give this film 5 more seconds of my time.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I watched the special like everybody else because I was interested in it and wanted to see what it was about. Well, this last month, there was a program on the Sky One TV network in England where a gentleman, I forgot the gentleman's name, but his show is called Eamon Investigates.
Yeah.
And he interviewed Ray Santilli and a number of other people who claimed that they were in on this, and Santilli said that it was a hoax. Well, he didn't call it a hoax. He called it a reconstruction. He still claims that the footage he had was real, but by the time he had first contacted the cameraman and when he had finally gotten the film back in London, he said that 95% of it had oxidized and was ruined.
Yeah. And
that the remaining 5% of the film was in terrible condition. And so he decided to, quote-unquote, reconstruct it. And so they got a special effects guy, they molded an alien, they threw it on the table, and they claimed that they used a flat in London to film as a stage for this alien autopsy that they filmed, where they had converted it and they bought antiques and had done some research on, well, would these tools be available and some of the techniques that surgeons use doing autopsies and whatever else.
Yeah.
And the guy who did the special effects for it, apparently he's a sculptor named John Humphreys, said that he used a sheep's brain for the brain and a lamb's leg for the leg joint. You might recall there was one leg on the alien that was all blown out that looked like it had been severely injured and was very charred and everything else, and that's what they used. And so now they've confessed to this whole thing, and now people are... It's been a very weird reaction, because when they said, well, we used sheep's brains, a lot of people said, well, that doesn't look like a sheep's brain to me. There's something else going on here. And Santilli himself has said that in his quote-unquote reconstruction, he has actually inserted original frames from the surviving alien autopsy footage that he claims is real.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to tell the difference between the frames and what he's reconstructed.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd actually, on this program, he had actually shown some of the frames, but you really couldn't see what was on them. But he said he had brought some to show the investigator. And so this isn't a coincidence, in my opinion, that Santilli did this. Because he just released a movie called Alien Autopsy, which is a comedy based on him supposedly acquiring the film and all the controversy that followed it.
Yeah.
So a lot of people were really questioning his timing as to him coming forward and saying, oh, yeah, well, it was a hoax. Well, restoration, as he wants to call it.
Yeah, because the special made for a good promotional vehicle for his movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then, obviously, ufology is littered with these kind of stories, and controversial stories in general, really, where people take one side or the other, and you could run the gamut from Billy Meyer to MJ12, Dolce bases, and recently Dan Burrish. Is there any other controversial UFO story that UFOWatchdog.com has sunk its teeth into that you could tell me about that people might be interested in hearing about?
There was a case down in Brazil in 2003 where a gentleman named, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right or not, is a Urandir Oliveira. And Urandir claimed that he was contacted telepathically by some ETs and transported from his bed up into a ship and flew off for a while and then returned. And some people are probably familiar with this because the evidence that he purportedly had were his bed sheets, where they had somehow, if you look at the bed sheets in this picture that's out there, there's an outline of a human body. There's a contour you can make it of a human body, and it looks like it's burned, and there's been some energy interaction or whatever else you want to call it, and some small stones. And there was a lot of controversy surrounding this case because the first time it got looked at by some scientists, they said there's nothing magical about the bed sheets, there's nothing we can't explain, and these stones that he claims fell from the sky when he was abducted are a common stone in that area, and they're also common here in the United States, down in the Southwest, and they're called Moki marbles, and they're just rocks that have formed on their own. They're very round, and a lot of New Age kind of stores sell them down there in the desert and wherever else.
Yeah.
Well, what had happened was the person investigating the case didn't feel that the scientist did a good enough job, so that person went and got a second opinion. And it raised quite a stink in the UFO community. And what finally wound up happening was it fell off the face of the planet. No one heard anything else about the supposed evidence.
Yeah.
And some rocks were supposedly taken to some professors at a university back east, and they looked at the rocks and said, well, we've never seen anything like this, but they're not extraterrestrial by any means. And I guess they really didn't get to finish their analysis because the investigator came back and pulled the rocks out, and that was kind of the end of it. And kind of the point I want to make is that, we always hear about these supposedly great UFO cases, and we get the sensational half of the story, but we never get the other half of the story. What was the end result with a lot of this evidence and, follow-up investigation and whatever else? We never really get to hear about that. So that's just one of many, 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 cases that are out there that you just kind of shake your head out and wonder, how did it get there? Why haven't we heard about this? Where's the follow-up, What's going on with it? So you might have heard about a lot of that. Yeah.
You took the words right out of my mouth. You hear a lot of stories, and the stories always get to the investigation phase, and then you never hear about them again. And that seems to be a recurring theme in ufology. And one of the more interesting episodes that you've been involved with was an investigation of yours that sort of transcended just an investigation and became a story in and of itself, and you sort of became part of the story. And that was the infamous Sean David Morton investigation that eventually turned into a lawsuit. Now, I've heard a lot about this lawsuit via Sean David Morton and his various appearances on other radio programs, and I figured since we have you on the show, it would be a great opportunity to get the other side of the story on the Sean David Morton lawsuit. So why don't you tell us what you can about this story?
Back in 2001, early 2001, I published an investigation called The Shameless Psychic and His Prophecy of Lies, and it was about this gentleman named Sean Morton, who had made a number of claims on his website and through other avenues. And my investigation had revealed that a lot of these claims weren't all they were cracked up to be. Mm-hmm. And so I published a story. I'd asked him to respond several times, never got an answer from him. And so years later, I get sued. This guy files a $1 million lawsuit against me, and I was surfing the web, and I found out my website was down, and I contacted my web host, and he told me, "Hey, Sean David Morton's suing you." And I kind of had a chuckle because I thought he was joking with me.
Yeah. And
he wasn't. And I thought, okay, well, fine, we'll go ahead and deal with it. And so I got served with some papers and went through it, and I was lucky enough to retain a really good attorney who asked me to have a phone conference with her, and I had a phone conference, and she said, "Hey, send me all your proof." And so I FedExed her a box of stuff, with copies of all my files in it. And she called me back and said, "Okay, fine, yeah, this looks good. I'll take this case." So she takes the case, and what happens is she files this motion where it's called a SLAP. It's a strategic lawsuit against public participation.
Yeah.
And I really felt that Mr. Morton filed this lawsuit to silence me because he didn't like what was going on. And if a guy's suing you for $1 million and says in his lawsuit that you're impacting him financially, well, So anyway, it winds up going to a hearing, and I really felt that he was doing this just to keep me quiet. And I think he wanted my website and a bunch of the other things on there to go away.
Yeah.
So he said that everything on the website was false. So my lawyer responded saying, it's not false, it's true. And if Mr. Morton wants to provide evidence that his claims have even a chance of being found to be true, then he needs to provide evidence that my client has said anything false about him. Mm-hmm. And that's really what it came down to. I don't need, to sit here and tell you a tale for a half an hour. It's very short and it's sweet. He was asked to prove his claims in court. All he had to do was prove that one single solitary claim that I made against him was false, and he would have won, and he didn't do it. And that's really what it came down to. And he was ordered to pay my legal fees, and that was the end of it.
Yeah.
And so he's had chance after chance after chance to respond to all these claims. He's had, a lawsuit. He tried to appeal it. He's had a number of years, his website, and a number of other avenues that he could have responded to it on. But I've invited him several times, and it's posted on my website that I'll either discuss this matter with him publicly if he wants to, or if he wants to provide proof of his claims, I'll be more than happy to publish on my website. It's really that simple, and that was pretty much it. And I think the most amusing thing about this is that this is a guy who claims that he's a psychic, but he kind of couldn't see the outcome of his own lawsuit. That's just priceless to me. I think that's just absolutely priceless. Yeah. So that really was the crux of the whole lawsuit. He said I was lying. He tried to sue me. I said prove it. He couldn't do it, and that's the end of it.
Yep. Well, I'm glad we got the opportunity to get your side of the story, and and just to be fair, I'll extend the invitation to Sean David Morton to come on Binnall of America Audio in response to the lawsuit story. If he wants to, he can drop me a line, and we'll bring him on the show to respond. Maybe someday we can get you guys head to head in some situation. It'd be really cool. But if Sean David Morton wants to be on Binnall of America Audio to respond to the lawsuit, then he can come on the show.
And if Mr. Morton wants, I'll happily have a public conversation with him about it.
Hey, that would be fantastic. I'd love to host that. That would be killer. One of the things that I saw on the website that really amused me, and hopefully, maybe you can expound on it a little more, you have sort of like Dirtbag of the Month, and the one that really made me laugh the most, I guess, was Aliens. The aliens are the Dirtbag of the Month. For all the problems they've caused us, and for the bizarre subculture they've spawned here on planet Earth. What about these dastardly aliens? I share your opinion that I wish they would just show up and end this foolishness now so we can all move on and, go on to the next level instead of playing hide and seek like 5-year-olds.
Well, the aliens, whether they exist or not, if they exist, they're probably having a good laugh at our expense. Seriously. I mean, how would you feel if you saw this kind of nonsense going on down here and you were, a higher, more intelligent being, let's say? I don't think I'd want to land here.
Exactly.
I think I'd be avoiding this planet. That's just me. Yeah, the whole bit about tying, aliens into UFOs, and really UFOs and popular culture means aliens now. It doesn't mean what I'd gone back to earlier, that literal acronym where it's an unidentified flying object.
Yeah.
It means ET, aliens, beings from space, space brotherhood, space brother, whatever you want to call them.
Exactly.
Whatever they're calling them now.
Yeah.
The Greys. And it's really true that I don't think that any other figure, aside from religious figures, I don't think any other figures really dominated our society in terms of media and popular culture like the aliens have. It's really, really amazing. And I was at McMinnville this weekend at the UFO Fest. I did a presentation there. And Paul Davids was there. I'm not sure if you know who he is or not.
Yeah, he made the Roswell movie.
Right. And I had met Paul a number of years ago, and we touched base. And we watched the parade together. And Paul brought up a really great point. He said that at a lot of parades, whether the UFO festival parades or whether they're 4th of July parades.
Yeah.
And he focused on the 4th of July parades. He says, do you notice that you see more people dressed up like aliens than you do of Abe Lincoln or George Washington?
Yeah, yeah.
And it was a great insight, because really our society, in terms of what we think about aliens and whatever, it's really kind of dominated by those images of the big eyes, big head, kind of short little guys.
Yeah.
And I'm just amazed at how prominent that really is out there in books and movies and TV series and cable shows and everything else.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things I learned that really opened my eyes a lot was something I'd heard from Stanton Friedman, and that was that the classic typical image of the gray, that nobody owns any trademark on the gray alien. So you can literally put it on whatever you want, and you're never going to get in any trouble, and it's a pretty popular image. It's like a Mickey Mouse, but without the trademark copy. You know what I mean? Oh,
yeah, he's completely right. Yeah.
So it's like, it's like the market can be completely oversaturated with gray aliens because no one owns gray aliens, so it helps.
Yeah, the dirtbag thing that I did on the aliens was kind of my humorous look at the aliens.
Yeah, yeah.
In a lot of ways. I thought it was pretty funny anyway. Maybe someone else won't, but...
Well, I got a good laugh out of it, so, I'm sure most of the people do. When you really think about it, the aliens are the cause of all of this.
You have to laugh about a lot of this stuff. You really do, because the field's just, if you didn't, you'd just go nuts if you took it 125% seriously all the time.
Exactly. Like, that's one of the reasons, like I said at the beginning, that's one of the big influences on Binnall of America that UFOWatchdog.com has had, is that we take everything with a grain of salt, and we try to inject some humor into things, because, a lot of this cloak and dagger stuff is shadow and for a fact. And if you see through that, you're kind of like, oh, it's not really, it's not as spooky as it is after all, or something.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to take it in a more positive light. At your website, you also highlight what you call the Hall of Fame, and it's not, ufology is not just riddled with hoaxers and liars and snake oil salesmen and people trying to get your money. There's also a lot of great researchers out there. So who would you say gets the UFOWatchdog.com stamp of approval, or the Hall of Fame notation, as you like to call it?
On a side note about this really quick, during my presentation this weekend at that festival in McMinnville, I have a slide that I use in my presentation where I show three UFO researchers who are heavily involved in the physical aspect of UFO investigation.
Yeah.
And I asked the audience to name, for anybody that can name these three people. Nobody could name them. Not one person could name all three people.
Yeah.
And I had Nancy Talbot from the BLT research team, and Ted Oliphant, who was best known for his cattle mutilation investigations back in Alabama when he was a police officer.
Yeah.
And then I had Ted Phillips, who has worked for years and years and years gathering physical trace case evidence and having it analyzed. And not one person could name any of those people. I was amazed. One person kind of knew who Nancy Talbot was, but didn't know her name.
Yeah.
Said, "Oh, that's the crop circle lady." That's what they referred to her as. Well, if you go to my Hall of Shame, for people that I really feel are doing a lot of discredit to this field, if you look in that, people readily will recognize those names.
Yeah.
If you go to the Hall of Fame, there are a few names that people will likely recognize, but not a lot. And that really tells you where UFOs are at in terms of who people look to get their information.
Yeah.
They go to the UFO personalities, not the investigators.
Yeah.
And the Hall of Fame, I've got quite a few people in there, and I think a lot of people don't know that I have a Hall of Fame. They think I'm just out there to cap on every single person that's in this field, and that's entirely not true.
Exactly. Yeah.
In the Hall of Fame, I've got J. Allen Hynek, of course, and Nancy Talbot. I've done some work with Nancy, and she's just a super, super sharp lady and really likes science. to apply science to the field. And of course, I've got Stan Friedman. I disagree with some stuff that Stan has to say, but I like Stan. I think he does a pretty good job. Another gentleman, I have Richard Hall. He's written several books on UFOs, and he was a NICAP investigator. And his UFO evidence books are just fabulous. I've got a lot of people in here, and I would just ask anybody who's going to my website to go ahead and take a visit. Just go ahead and take a spin around through there and see some of these folks who I really feel have done a lot of credit to the field. Peter Robbins, I've got him in there, and you've interviewed Peter, haven't you?
Yeah, Peter's a great guy.
Right. Yeah, he sure is. He sure is a wonderful man. Very nice guy. And so if you just take a cruise through there, I've got a little bit of everybody in there. Somebody wrote me, I've got Cal Korff in there, and a lot of people think that Cal's this big, government-sponsored UFO debunker, and he really isn't. Cal's he just needs a lot of convincing. He really does. And just take a spin through there and see who's in there.
Yeah,
these are a lot of people that probably most folks don't know about.
And their research is solid, and it's good, and it's worth checking out. And a lot of times, if you check out some of these people, like you said, in the Hall of Shame, a lot of their stuff doesn't go anywhere, and you're kind of left, like we said, at the investigating stage, sort of.
Right. Where's the evidence at? That's what I really like. I like things that you can send to people who know much more than I do, that you can send them things that they can analyze, and I just like solid stuff. I'm a physical evidence kind of guy. I always have been and always will be.
Yeah. And then to sort of take it to a contemporary level, in a sense, the big news of the last 6 months has been Serpo. I'm sure you've heard of Serpo. I'm sure you're watching it just like the rest of us are. Everyone's sort of watching Serpo to see what's going to happen. Will it fall into the Dr. Reed alien autopsy level of hoaxery, or will it turn out to be something more than that? Who knows? What's your opinion on Serpo as it's unfolded so far?
I'll keep it really short and sweet. Until I see some proof, I'm not going to believe a word they're saying. And it goes back to my conspiracy end on that, is how do you prove that?
Yeah.
How do you prove a conspiracy if no one wants you to prove it? You don't. And it's just one of those stories. It's a fascinating story, if you really think about it. Even in terms of science fiction, it's a good story.
Yeah.
But as far as I'm concerned, until there is some proof, because when you start getting anonymous sources and this and that, and you don't have anything to back the story up with, I'm just not I'm going to stay away from it. I'm not going to touch it, and I'm not going to pay any attention until that stuff shows up.
Yeah. But where do you think the Serpo story will go in the long run? Do you have an opinion on how you think what direction it'll go at all?
It's really taken on a life of its own on the internet.
Yeah.
And if it keeps going where it's going nowhere.
What do you mean by that?
Story after story after story, posting after posting after posting, with nothing to back anything up with. I'm not a big fan of it at all.
Yeah, you think if they just keep rolling out these stories that people are going to yawn eventually and sort of go away.
Yeah, exactly. People aren't going to pay any attention. People, I think we're kind of in an age where people are starting to question things quite a bit more than they ever have.
Yeah. And
people are really turning into, show me the evidence. Where's the proof?
Yeah. Okay, and also you have one section on your thing about conferences, and you said you recently spoke at the 7th Annual UFO Fest, and I think you said McMinnville?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in McMinnville, Oregon. So why don't you just give me your thoughts on that? You were pretty down on conferences, like you said. Has that sort of changed your opinion? Were you happy with the way that one went? Your thoughts on conferences in general, and your recent appearance. You don't usually do appearances at conferences, right? So
I've turned down some speaking invitations in the past, and I've had a personal policy for a number of years that I don't do UFO conventions or conferences. I just don't, because of the experiences that I had with the two that I did go to. I didn't like it. It was very contrived and very sensationalized, and there was a lot of nonsense floating around, and I just didn't want to have any part of it because I thought it was very, very uncredible, and that it had a very negative effect on a lot of the solid cases and the solid body of UFO evidence. Mm-hmm. And so I just said, no way. There's no way in hell I'm doing one of these things. And a couple of weeks ago, I got a call from a guy who runs this UFO Fest in McMinnville, Oregon, and he said that somebody had recommended me as a speaker there. And he asked me if I would be interested, and I said, thanks, but no thanks. I just didn't even mince words with the guy. I said, no, I'm not doing it. Here's my policy, and here's why.
Yeah.
And the guy said, could I take, 10 minutes of your time real quick? And I said, well, sure. I mean, you've gone through the trouble of calling me. And he just explained to me, he said, look, I understand your aversion to these things. And, I've read your website, and I can understand that. And we have a very serious side that we offer, and we try to offer the most credible speakers we can find and people that we feel are credible. We avoid, the kind of kookery that goes along with the UFO scene.
Yeah.
And on the other side, too, we have kind of this lighthearted affair. There's this lighthearted side of it that we do with the UFO parade, and we do a reenactment of War of the Worlds on stage and a bunch of other stuff. And he says, yeah. I won't tell you that we're completely serious, but we are serious about having, trying to present the most credible speakers that we can.
Yeah, pretty disciplined.
Right. And so I listened to the guy, and he seemed like he was pretty sincere. And I said, let me think about it, and I'll get back to you. So I thought about it, and I talked to a couple of people that I know and who have done the UFO, have done the UFO speaker circuit, so to speak.
Yeah.
And they really highly recommended it. And so I thought, okay, fine, I'll go do it. Why not? So I called the guy back, and I went and did it. And I got up there after, it's a long story. The trip was horrible. I got bad directions the whole time, and I was exhausted. I didn't have much sleep the night before when I left, and got up there, and I had a really good time. It was very well done. I thought it was very tasteful, the way that they presented everything. And the whole event, the whole festival centers around the Paul Trent 1950 UFO sighting and subsequent photographs of that sighting. And they had a guy there who had filmed a documentary on the Trent case, and they'd screened that, and it's a very good documentary. It's very well done. And I can't remember the name of the gentleman who filmed it, but he did an excellent job with it. And I had a great time. I even went to the damn UFO parade. I couldn't believe I'd done that. And I met a lot of really nice people up there. And I dare to say that I would do that again. I would probably go back to that festival if I was ever invited back, definitely. And the lectures were very well attended, and there were a number. And at first, when I went there, I thought I didn't know what to expect. I kind of thought, maybe I'm going to be viewed as the bad guy there. And I got up there to do my presentation, and everything went wrong with that damn presentation that could possibly have gone wrong. Because I generally don't do public speaking. I just don't. It's just not my thing. Some people are really good at it. I'm not. I'll be frank about it. And so my presentation, I had a PowerPoint presentation that I was doing, and they loaded up the presentation, and it wasn't working. It wouldn't come up on the screen.
Oh, man.
And I was really relying on some notes and some other things, and so I kind of had to ad-lib there, and the audience and I had a good laugh over this thing not working. And once it finally got rolling and stuff, I think I did okay. And it was a good time. I had a really good time over there, and the people were it was really well received. I really didn't think it was going to be. I thought, these people aren't going to like me at all because I'm pretty blunt when I'm talking about things, and I'm very direct.
Yeah.
But it was really well received. So that whole experience has kind of changed my viewpoint of the conference scene. The other thing too is that these conferences, and it's kind of sad, especially with the big ones, because they do a lot of that sensationalistic crap, and it's the only real public venue on any large scale, besides doing radio or TV, that researchers, serious, legitimate researchers, can go and present their evidence and their findings.
Yeah.
And it's really, really sad that it comes down to that. And what I noticed at the conferences that I went to long ago was that the people who were presenting the more sensationalistic, outlandish material had more people in their workshops than the people who were serious, legitimate, hands-on investigators.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
And a lot of it revolved around money and making deals and this and that. And I'm not into any of that. I just like people to get the information and be done with it. So
That's cool.
And another thing was I ran into a lot of people down there. It was the first place that I ran into Sean David Morton, and I tried to ask him some questions, and when I started asking some pointed questions about some things, he just didn't have time, turned around in the middle of our conversation and walked off. And that happened to me quite a bit down there. Quite a few people did that. And some people were just saying just some nonsensical garbage. One guy had told me that the stars in the sky were giant UFO motherships. And I kind of rolled my eyes and I said, okay, what's your proof of that?
Yeah.
He said, my proof is that the stars move in the sky at night. And I said, you don't think that has anything to do with the rotation of the planets? Or, when you hear stuff like that, it's really, your eyebrows go up. And after that, I really didn't want to have any part of them at all, ever. And I just had a very good time at this UFO conference, and I thought it was done done very respectfully and in good taste.
That's great. So what's next for Royce Myers and UFOWatchdog.com? Are you working on any key investigations right now?
I don't have anything going, and my real life has taken a lot of my time with my job and my family and some other things that I have going. And I'll just we'll see what comes up next. There is a case I want to go down and investigate down on the coast that somebody had sent me that happened a number of years ago, and I don't want to go into too many details about it because I haven't done the investigation. So when that happens, maybe I can check back in with you. Nice.
And now I know you're down on books and conferences and stuff, but have you ever considered putting out a book at all? Because it sounds like your investigations and some of these adventures that you found yourself in would be an interesting book. Have you ever considered that?
I almost started writing a book about the whole Johnathan Reed case because there was just so much there that a lot of people still don't know about, and I just kind of shied away from the idea.
Yeah.
I just did. I don't want to be accused of doing the same thing that I've been against all this time.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I don't want to kick myself in the ass, so to speak. And
yeah, I know what you mean.
So no, I really haven't considered doing it. Maybe one of these days, if I am inspired enough to write a book or feel that it's time to write a book, I'll probably do some kind of charity deal where the proceeds go to charity, and who knows? Yeah,
maybe like the worst UFO hoaxes ever, and the proceeds can go to actual UFO investigations that are like legit.
Yeah, right.
We can dream, can't we?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being on the show, Royce. Like you said, we covered a lot of great topics here in the interview. People in the ufology field, a lot of times they're told what they want to hear. And a lot of times they don't want to be told that they've been fooled or that they've been bamboozled or that maybe somebody's been lying to them, but sometimes that's the case. And you do an amazing amount of great work rooting out these people that are trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the serious investigators and the lay people in the field of ufology. So, like you said, Better Business Bureau of Ufology, we've needed somebody like this for a long time. I highly appreciate your work. And like I said, you've been a big inspiration to BinnallofAmerica.com, so I was more than happy to have you on the show and to hopefully bring more people to UFOWatchdog.com and give them a chance to understand what you do and what your website's all about. Thanks for being on the show.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
That does it for this week's edition of Binnall of America Audio. I want to thank Royce Myers for stopping by. The website, of course, UFOWatchdog.com. Check it out. Also want to thank Leslie, Chiron, and R. Lee for your help and support with the audio series and with the website. If you haven't checked out their columns, please do so. Leslie's on Tuesday, Chiron on Wednesday, R. Lee every other Monday or so. That's at BinnallofAmerica.com, plus tons more satirical pictures that you're just going to laugh out loud at if you see them. The weekly BinnallofAmerica.com mothership, the Binnall Report, that comes out on Friday evenings. And just tons more. Check out BinnallofAmerica.com. We update twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. You never know what's going on with us. And if you're a long-time listener of Binnall of America Audio, please feel free to click the PayPal button, make a donation, help us out, help offset the costs of the audio series. We would greatly appreciate it, and it would really go a long way to keeping the show on the road. Next week, the guest is to be announced. I'm playing a serious game of phone tag here with this guy. I got 2 more guests lined up, for Binnall of America Audio Season 1. We're in the final countdown here. The last episode, of course, will be the season finale of Season 1. Then we'll be taking the summer off, and we'll be rocking and rolling at you in September with Binnall of America Audio Season 2. But, for now, next week, to be announced, we'll let you know what's going on at the website. Until you hear from me again, folks, thanks for listening. This is Tim Binnall, signing off.